Hello everybody, I hope you're well. I'm Callum, I run Repair Wins, and in the video today I'm going to be taking a look at this. It's an Xbox 360S. I bought it from a charity shop for £20. I definitely overpaid because number one, it looks like the warranty seal has been tampered with, and number two, it doesn't have the power supply. Now, if I were to go online and buy a power supply, it'd cost £15 or £20. So I thought, why don't I try and modify this junk desktop power supply that's 12 volts only, and I'll need the help of this little board here as well, so that it can work with this Xbox. So I'm going to go to all of those lengths just to see if the console actually works, which is going to mean fully dismantling it, desoldering the original power connector, soldering the wires from that power supply in, soldering this board in to make it work, I'll explain that later, all just so we can see if the thing turns on. A smart man would buy the adapter and then just send it back to Amazon, but we all know full well that Amazon basically will send it to be incinerated or shredded. It won't get resold, it'll end up going in the bin. I've got the power supply spare, I've found a little bit of time, why not do something a little bit daft, why not waste some time? So without any further ado, I'll switch to the overhead camera because we need to get this thing taken apart. If you weren't aware, taking one of these consoles apart is an absolute pain. The only thing that's easy to do is removing the hard drive. So if I just lift this cover and then pull on this piece of fabric here, the hard drive comes out. Congratulations, everything else is nightmarish. I skimmed through an iFixit guide to take this thing apart, but someone who runs an electronics repair business should be able to take a device apart without looking at a guide. Then again, the 360S is known for being tough to work on, but I'm pretty much just going to give it a go. So I'm going to put my pry tool in and attempt to remove all of the clips holding the various panels on. That one wasn't too hard, so famous last words, maybe it's not going to be quite as bad as I thought it was. How about I flip it over and see if this cover here can be removed. Now, what I don't want to do is mar up the plastic. Right, so I did hear a pop as a clip has disengaged, so I'm going to keep that in there, and then I'm going to get another pry tool and shimmy that further along. Oh, looks like this piece comes off, so that's alright then. And then we've got these openings. Right, the clip is clearly in the middle, so I'm going to put this tool in the gap because this one's got a sharper point. Now, by the way, you're not really supposed to use metal tools, but for something like an Xbox, you will never get away with using a plastic tool. You pretty much don't have a choice. I've managed to pry this piece off. I don't think I was supposed to, but we're learning as we go, so I'm just going to put that on the side, and I think this piece is the next one that should come off. You see, this is really hard to see as the thing. Like the PlayStation 3, for example, because I've worked on a lot of PlayStation 3 Slims. In order to take those things apart, you basically just take a bunch of screws out and the console comes apart. It's obviously not quite that simple, but it's a much simpler machine to get into. Then again, this thing must have been a lot cheaper for Microsoft to build, because something that can just be snapped together by machines is a lot faster than jigs that have to drive screws in. It's free. Let's put it down, let's spin the console around, let's try and take this side off. If it turns out I am breaking stuff I shouldn't be breaking, I'm not really too worried. I'm just going to put T7000 on there and I'll leave that to sit for a day. That'll set. These pieces will be glued back in because, for example, I know that I broke this piece off that should have been stuck to there, but it's fine. I can just use T7000 to glue that back in place and it'll go on the way it's supposed to. Same story as last time. I'm doubtful this piece was supposed to come off, but it's just impossible to see what you're doing. Imagine you were taking one of these things apart sort of just outside a warranty because let's say it stopped connected to a controller and you wanted to remove this board here to replace it. You probably wouldn't have had an iFixit guide to follow or even a YouTube tutorial. You know, they're designed not to be simple to get into. Given it looks like it's a case of just removing one screw, I'm going to take this board here out before I continue. What I don't want to do is try and pry the cover off and then bend the board and snap it. So it should just wiggle. See, once you're in, it's really simple. What's ironic is that once you know the procedure, it's not actually that hard. Take a look. And that one's open. And that one's, yeah, brilliant. So I've just caused a bit of damage for no real reason. It's fine though, like I've said, I can reverse the damage. We're at the stage where I need to remove the warranty seal, so there's no going back from this. That's definitely been taken off before. There's no getting around it. That has 100% been removed before. Looks like there isn't actually a screw hidden beneath it. All I'm going to do is just use my thumb to slide all of the adhesive to one side and then take it off in one go. I've dug in, cleared these two clips here, and now that they've been cleared, I've been able to slightly split the console apart. Now, you never just grab and wrench, but what I'm going to do is hold this in place, and I'm just going to sit, because this is the bit of the console you'll actually see when it's back together. I'm just going to see if some gentle prying will get it to come the rest of the way apart. I'm just wondering if there's a hidden screw or something I haven't taken into account here. Like I say, I'm not going to pry with a huge amount of force. I just want to see if this thing feels like it's willing to come apart. And if I'm being entirely honest, it doesn't look like it wants to. So what I'm going to do is just put this tool in here, just so it doesn't close itself back up. I'm going to sit the console down and I'll take a quick look online. You know, this is a lot less nerve-wracking on a £20 console than it would be on a £350 one, you know, especially in 2011 money. So, looks like a spider made its way in there at some point. You know, I'm actually quite pleased with how well this thing's come apart. I'd like to get this bottom cover taken off, but before I do, I need to remove two screws to take this board out. Right, does it just unplug? The theory is it does, and it does. Now, how easy is it to remove the cover? So if I just flip the machine over, does it literally just lift off? I'm kind of hoping so. It doesn't just lift off, but that's clearly pretty much free. I don't know if these two were supposed to come off as an assembly. I think they were, because you've got this little clip here. So if I give this a bit of a wiggle, it should want to come free. I can unplug the SATA connector, and then I can unplug the power cable. Right, so that's free. There's at least one screw holding the hard drive caddy in, and it's this silver one on the side. I've removed these screws from the bottom, and now that I've done that, this piece just comes out. I also made sure to unplug this thing from the board. I was hoping I could leave this thing installed on the board, but in order to get the board removed, I've got to take the 4 screws that are on the bottom out, so when they come out, I think I can then remove the board. Start each of them off, don't just undo one all the way and then undo another one all the way. The reason why is that if you just undo one of them all the way, then that corner of the heatsink's going to try and lift, and it's going to put uneven clamping pressure on the other corners of the APU, and that could cause basically the APU to crack. Alright then, I've pulled the 2 screws that were holding the power supply, so if I just flip the console over, I think, as long as I don't use silly force, I should actually be able to get the board out now. A bit of prying force, not too much, don't want to cause damage. Brilliant, that is the motherboard free. I'm not going to undo this. Number one, I don't have the right tool, but number two, there's not really much point removing this thing and then replacing the thermal paste if the entire console's broken. I think the best thing to do would actually be to desolder this power connection here, and then I'll be able to solder in the wires that I need to solder from my power supply. What I'm looking to do then is remove all the solder from these points. In a perfect world, when I take all the solder out, the port will just fall out. The reality is though, that's probably not going to happen. Either way, to maximise my odds of actually getting the solder out of here, I've got a ZD915 de-soldering station. You can use solder wick and a soldering iron, but it just takes forever. I've got a soldering station, I've got this stuff, which is low melt solder. I'm going to apply that fairly generously, and then the other thing I'm going to apply is flux. Flux helps solder flow, and without flux, a job like this would be practically impossible. So let's put the flux on. Not going to be stingy with this stuff, it's really cheap and I have a whole tube full of it. It took quite a while, but my desoldering gun has finally heated up. So if I put it here and I click the trigger, you get that quality noise, that noise that everyone seems to love for some reason. I've got my board held in 2 Hacker Omni vices. These things cost £55 a piece. Obviously I'm a repair technician, so I bought some of them, and they have made my life 10 times easier. Doing a job like this in the past without these boards, without these holders, was considerably more difficult. So I think I'm just going to put low melt on every pin first of all, and then when they all have low melt, I'll then do the desoldering. Can you see how much easier it would have been to just buy a power supply? Remember, I'm not doing this thing to save money. You know, I'm not short £15. I could have just bought the official Microsoft Power Adapter. It's nice to just reuse what you have, and just to test your skills, because an Xbox 360S is quite hard to get apart, and then one of these ports is quite hard to remove. Plenty of low melt flooded into the board now, so I'm going to pull the trigger. Right, and now hopefully I should just be able to remove the solder from these pins. So no, the end is too small for that pin there. I am going to hold down for a fair few seconds. I want to give this the best chance possible. And what I'm also going to do is clean the tool after every use. The pins that aren't on ground planes seem to be easier, so the signal pins, they're going to be much easier than the 12 volt or the ground pins. Even if the tool is only able to clear the solder out of half of the holes, it's going to make my life much easier. Doing this is reminding me of the time I watched Necroware desolder an entire PCI slot, or maybe it was an AGP slot or something similar, to repair a computer motherboard. You know, I'm grateful I only have 10 or 12 pins to do here and not 200. So let's just get the solder wick, line everything up, try and not melt the plastic peg. And what I'm doing is heating the pad as well as the pin, because we want the solder to flow down into the hole. Let's give it a try. Wiggling it around, pressing down fairly firmly. That's got it, 100% that has got it. Let's, since that seemed to work for me here, let's do the same thing here. So just going to hold the board, wiggle back and forth. Right, okay, I think we're looking pretty good. Good news, I've managed to remove the port, and furthermore, it's in really, really good condition, and so is the motherboard. I'm quite pleased at how well this has gone, although I had to use low melt solder and a desoldering pump and some really high quality solder wick. So this is not a job for the faint of heart. If this is sort of your first project, I'd steer you away from a games console. I'd tell you instead to go to a charity shop and buy a used CD player, or pilfer an old laptop from a family member that's no longer being used or something. I wouldn't recommend you tackle, say, a USB-C port on Nintendo Switch for your first project. I certainly wouldn't recommend looking at PlayStation or Xbox controllers, because I tried to fix PlayStation 4 controllers when I was starting out, and trust me, I was only spending £15 on the controllers, but it quickly added up when I kept breaking them further. What you saw me doing in the last clip with the cotton bud was removing all the old flux. Now you can see that the area we were just working in is nice and clean. I'm going to get this gammy bit of solder wick put out of the way. I'm going to tidy my desk, and then we can come back and we can start modding this thing. Let's take a break from the Xbox motherboard for a moment and have a look at the power supply. So I was expecting to need this DC to DC step down converter to convert what I thought would be 12 volts down to 5 volts so it would work with the Xbox. But the reality is, this power supply actually has a 5 volt standby rail, which you can just about make out, and the best news is it's 2 amps. The Xbox only needs 1 amp, so that's absolutely perfect. And then it says the 12 volt output isn't to exceed 174 watts. The Xbox only needs 135, and that's absolute worst case. So this means this power supply is practically a perfect candidate, besides being, you know, a little bit big and a bit boxy. On this power supply then, the yellow wires are for 12 volts, and there are 5 of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut just these wires here. So there we are, they're now free. I'm going to cut these as well, because that means I've got 2 positives and 2 negatives. And then I can come down to this connector, and ideally I'm going to have 4 grounds, which I do, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to have 3 yellows, which I do. And the extra ground is for the purple wire, because that's the 5 volt standby. I've probed around the motherboard and I've managed to work out what's what. One of them is the power supply enable pin, and then the other one is the 5 volt standby pin. I don't know which of those two is which, but it doesn't matter. We'll work those out later. What I'm going to do first of all is solder the ground wires, because there's plenty of pads, so that should be the easiest one to do. I have my soldering iron set to 400 degrees Celsius, and the same as last time, I'm just going to put some flux on the board. So what you generally want to do is take your wires, twist them up like this, just so all the strands are together, and then when they're twisted up in such a way you can then solder them. And it just about fits. I'm going to fold it flat, I'm going to sort of hold it down in place for a moment, and then we're going to try and flow the solder in. I just want it sort of vaguely tacked in place. It doesn't need to be perfect yet. I'd like to pre-tin these before I solder, but the issue with that is that when you pre-tin them, you might make them too thick and then they don't want to solder into the board. So I'm just going to tack a few of the grounds in place, and then off camera I'll solder them down properly. I wish Lenovo had used copper wire for the power supply and not aluminium. Aluminium means the conductors have to be a lot thicker, and because they're thicker they're harder to solder on. I've soldered the black wires on. There's an absolute ton of solder on the other side. They're definitely not going to go anywhere. I'll be able to show you the finished product shortly. What I'm going to do now is take the yellow wires, at least 4 of them, and I'm going to solder them into the 4 points that I'm pointing to with my tool. I've soldered on 4 yellow wires and 4 black wires. This doesn't look the cleanest, but that doesn't really matter. What's important is that it's really sturdy. I'm obviously going to take a cotton bud and clean everything up when I'm done. I just thought I'd give you a quick status report. If I go down here, there's only 5 yellow wires on this entire power supply, and it's designed to provide up to, when it's stressed, 180 watts. So this thing only needs 135 watts, and that's when the Xbox is being pushed for everything it has. So I'm only actually going to solder 4 yellow wires because basically it's way easier. It's going to take a lot less time, and even 4 wires is probably more than is necessary. As for ground, I will solder a 5th ground because I need to solder the purple 5-volt standby wire in. But yeah, I'm basically just going to leave this extra yellow wire unsoldered, and I'm going to leave the extra ground wire unsoldered as well. Here's the final result from the underside. The grey wire that's poking through is the power good. I've just soldered it onto the I've soldered it onto one of the 12-volt pins. I thought I didn't want to leave it floating just in case it caused an issue. Otherwise you can see that the ground wires have been pushed through, and so has the 5-volt wire. And then there's a look at the other side. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that it's perfect. I will bring you in nice and close. What's important is that nothing's touching, and furthermore that nothing is in danger of touching. All I'm going to do now is pretty much bunch these together with some zip ties, try and run it fairly neatly, and then we'll actually be able to put the front panel on and give this console a test. All I'll need to do is bridge the green and black wire together, and then that'll tell the power supply to switch on, and we'll see if the Xbox comes to life. This is the exciting part. It's now time to test the console. So I've managed to squeeze everything in frame. You can see that I've got the Wi-Fi card plugged in, I've got the front panel plugged in, as well as this board sort of here. I don't have the power supply plugged in yet, but this wire is ready to go in, and in order to make the power supply actually turn on, I'll have to twist these 2 cables together. So I guess without any further ado, I mean, we're obviously not going to get a display or anything because nothing's plugged in, but this is switched on at the wall, I think. Yes, it's switched on at the wall, so let's plug the power supply in. That pop made me jump a bit, I've got to be honest. I'll spin that over, nothing's happened. Let's shorten both together, let's see what happens. Right, so we've got 5-volt standby going to the console. The question is, when I press the power button... Ooh! It switches on! I almost can't believe that. There's a blinking green light. I don't know if that's the console saying, oh my god, what are you doing? But the fact that this thing even switches on and then it hasn't immediately blown up is actually quite surprising. So there you are, Lenovo E73 power supply powering an Xbox. I think the blinking green light on the front, which can just about be seen, is pretty much telling me there's no DVD drive connected, though I could be wrong. Obviously then I'm going to have to connect a DVD drive up, I need to connect a display and whatnot. I'm just going to release these wires now. Then I'm going to unplug this before anything shorts that shouldn't. But there we are, that is a console working on an ATX power supply. I was going to retire for the evening, but I've decided to plonk everything on my chair because I want to see if it displays. So I've got nothing plugged into the LG monitor. The plan is that I'm just going to basically press the power button. Good news, it's switched on, still working. You can see that green light I was talking about. Let's go over to the LG and see if anything happens. Oh my god, it actually works. Wow. I'm quite surprised to see that. So I wonder why it was taken apart then. So it doesn't even look like it has an account on it. No, it says sign in, look. So, alright, I'm going to guess this has been updated to the latest software. Probably too new of a console to have a Blades dashboard, but maybe slightly anticlimactic because the console appears to just work okay. Perhaps it has a faulty DVD drive or something. But, I mean, so there's no doubt. I mean, look. That is an Xbox that's being powered by a computer power supply. You can see the wire runs straight down there to where it's plugged in. Unbelievable. Of course, I need a game to be able to test the console, but I don't own any. So I went on eBay, I expected to pay £3 or £4, but I found a seller that's selling games listed starting at 99p. I was skeptical, but apparently the Eldes, not the Elder, the Eldes Scrolls 5 Skyrim, 99p with free postage. Obviously I've bought one, I'm not going to click that because it'll give you my address, but yeah, 99p to buy a game to test the console. I really don't think that's a bad investment. As I'm waiting for the Raspberry Pi to arrive, I thought I might as well tackle the power switch. So, if you're confused by that because you're thinking just push the button on the front of the console and it switches on, what I mean is, you might recall I had to twist the green and the black wire together earlier on. That's pretty much telling the power supply switch on, and so the power supply is ready, and then when you press the power button on front of the Xbox, it can actually turn on. Without those two wires twisted together, nothing would happen. So I need a switch that tells it to do that, and I thought, why not use this, which is ironically from a different scrap power supply that I had many years ago. When it's set to 115, it's on, and when it's set to 230, it's off. So originally it was for switching voltages if you were in a different region. I've decided that what I'm going to do is just take a Sharpie, and this might end up completely backfiring, but I'm just going to fill it in where it says 115 and 230, and then I'm going to use this silver Sharpie to just draw a 1 here, 1 obviously meaning switched on. Maybe I'll have the best luck if I fill out the outline first. I can always come back and give this another coat in the future as well. Right, I don't think that's looking too bad. And then if I just sort of... I'm going to use a tool just so I don't accidentally poke the inside of the area that I've just drawn on. I just slide it across. I can obviously do the same here as well. That is alright. I think I'm going to have less chance of this working, but let's just try and draw a 1. That's obviously not very easy to see, but I'm not going to overdo it. I'm going to leave that there for a good long while. Hopefully it'll dry, and then I can just go over the top of it a few more times. But I think this has got all the markings of a working power switch. Obviously, if I want to turn it on, I just slide it across. If I want to turn it off, I slide it the other way. I've got some hard drives in front of me. 500 gig, 500 gig, 750. And the one I'm interested in is the one at the bottom. It's a terabyte. I thought, how hard can it be to just take this 250 gig holder, crack it open, and put my terabyte drive in there? I don't know the answer to that question, but my digging ended up leading me down a rabbit hole, and it turns out that in order to get the console to accept a bigger hard drive, you either need to use bad storage in conjunction with bad update, which are both temporary mods, or you need to jailbreak the entire console. So I've decided that in addition to all the other stuff, I'm going to try and RGH mod this Xbox. So this might end up being a complete waste of time because the mod might fail, but I am going to try and cut this enclosure apart ahead of time because I'm currently waiting for a controller to come in the post. So I thought, how hard can it be to just cut this thing apart and then stick the terabyte drive in there? I'm just going to spend a minute seeing how I go with this blunt rubbish knife, and if I can't make any progress with it, I'll start squeezing the tools in the side and trying to force the enclosure apart. I don't care if I break clips or if I cause a bit of cosmetic damage, because I can just use T7000 to glue it back together. I just want to make sure it actually goes in the console properly. So that has actually started splitting apart for me, which is nice. I might be able to get the tool in here now and just sort of use a bit of force to pull it along. The internet said this would be really difficult. Not so far. Gosh, I'm glad I'm wearing gloves because you could easily cut your skin doing this. Right, I think rounding this corner is going to be particularly difficult. Ah, goodness me. Let's see about the other side. So this side is at least part of the way open. Oh, I am using a lot of force there, like a lot of force. Oh, goodness me. Right, let's try and use the sharper side of the tool. That might be the way to do it. God, this is just dangerous. There's no way it needs to be this complicated. I mean, tell me why it's not just something that's held together with a few clips, and why the end user can't just crack it apart and upgrade their own storage. Oh my word. Right, okay, that took a bit of effort, but I managed to get into it. And all the stuff on the internet says that you need a Western Digital hard drive, yet in here, it's a Hitachi brand hard drive. So you can see, if I bring this up to here, that these two drives are different thicknesses. The one on the bottom is thinner, so if I put them like this, it might be a bit more obvious. Alright, not a problem. I can still put the terabyte drive in, and I can just 3D print a little sort of spacer that will make this the correct thickness. Either way though, we've gotten in here, and I'd like to say I've gotten in there without doing too much damage. The 3D part is complete, here it is. A download link will be in the description, you can get it for free on printables if you need it. Anyway, all I've got to do is put the hard drive in here, place this on the top, I don't need to be too precise with it, and then I just go around the edges with T7000, stick the lid on, and use these clamps to hold the lid in place. Let's see how well I do then. So I'm just going to remove this piece to make my life easier. I'll hold this down, and I'm just going to squeeze T7000 into here. I don't mind if I get a little bit seeping out, it's really not the end of the world. What I don't want to be doing is putting loads of it on the hard drive connector though, so let's try and not do that. Oh god, this is so fiddly. Also, it's one of those things that's that looks really easy on camera, but the reality is you have to have a very steady hand. And I'm barely even squeezing this bottle, and it's coming out quite quickly. Right, I've done better work, but whatever, that'll be fine. I just need to screw the cap on, and when the cap's screwed on, I can put the cover on. I hope you didn't forget about this piece. I'll just drop it in position, and then this piece on the top. Try and not get any of this horrible goop on my fingers. It's not that easiest stuff to clean off. And I guess I'll just start with the two, adjustable brackets, and we'll see about getting those on. I ended up foregoing the clamps for the most part. I've put two Omni vices on there, a microwave capacitor, and then in this corner here a clamp, because that was pretty much the easiest way of doing it. You can see the T7000 is squeezing out of the side, which is exactly what you want. You can sort of use your hand to, get rid of the excess when it's dry, but don't worry if it squeezes out the side, just leave it as it is until it's dried and then you can deal with it later. There we go then, I think this will be a good place to end part 1. Originally, I'd wanted this to just sort of be one really long video, but I've realised that it would run for 50 minutes to an hour, and it's just not likely that anyone's actually going to sit and watch something like that. It would take an absolute age to edit, and I'd really struggle to sort of keep, a coherent flow, because these videos, they don't tell a story, really, but, there is sort of a beginning, a middle, and an end, and I don't want it to kind of be a beginning, an end, a middle, an end, a beginning, because it just gets really confusing. So I've split it up into 2 parts, and that makes it a lot better. In this episode, we've covered the pre-jailbreak stuff, so that was obviously me taking the machine apart, sorting out a future power button, putting a new hard drive inside the caddy, and then actually testing the console. And in the next video, it's going to be all of the jailbreak and post-jailbreak stuff. So that is a saga involving a Raspberry Pi, soldering the 2 wires to the motherboard, doing it incorrectly and then doing it again, putting the machine back together, making the new power supply work, and actually showing off the jailbroken unit and all the stuff I'm able to do with it. So stay tuned for that one. In the meantime anyway, if you enjoyed what you watched here today, then feel free to leave a like. Likes obviously tell YouTube that I'm doing the right sort of stuff here. It means I recommend my videos to more people, more views, more subscribers, and that means the repair message gets spread further, which is exactly what I'm looking to do here. It means that more devices will be fixed, less stuff will go to landfill, and people will make smarter buying choices. Even better if you choose to subscribe, because that's the best way to see the new stuff that I put out, such as part 2 of this saga, or turning this laptop battery into a power bank, fingers crossed, a repair fail where I tried to fix a Samsung Galaxy S6 Edge and ended up breaking it further, an electric heater I found on the pavement, a PlayStation 2 I want to run from a laptop charger, and so on. I've got a lot of projects in the pipeline. Some of them will be cool. Some of them may not actually end up becoming videos. But either way, you'll just have to wait and see. That's all I've got for you today then. So as I say, I do hope you enjoyed it. And I will see you in the next video. Take care for now, and goodbye.